Peace and salam. Thank you so much for joining our second episode of the Civic Pulse. This is an episode I'm very excited about, from police to Palestine, from the cost of living to the costs of war. In this episode of the Civic Pulse, I'm having a great conversation with former U.S. Congressman, current Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and my dear friend, Keith. So, I gotta say, I've been waiting for this conversation for a while, wanting to hear your thoughts on these topics. But I wanted to first start also with a thank you, my dear brother,
Alhamdulillah.
Keith.
Well, thank you, sister. And I'm so glad to be with you. Salam alaikum. And for those who don't know what that means, it just means peace be unto you. And, and you said thank you to me. I said Alhamdulillah, which just means praise God. This is a show for everybody, Muslim or not. But I just want y'all to know that just when we get a compliment as a Muslim, we just remind ourselves that all the praise goes to the Creator. Yep.
Awesome. You know, this podcast actually exists today because about 2 years ago, and I don't remember, I don't know if you remember this conversation, but you were like, Dilara, you should have a podcast. The work of civic work is everyone's work, every
Right.
American's work, and it is ours as American Muslims. So you should have a podcast so everybody understands this work. And then a year ago, you asked, hey, why don't you have a podcast yet? I told you should start a podcast. And I was like, oh my God, Keith Ellison is telling me to start a podcast. We need to get this going. And I have this wonderful team led by Muhammad and Subhan, who are our producers. And you actually didn't even leave it at have it. You said you'd walk us through a plan and your team could guide our team. So this has been amazing. I wanted to start with a little bit of this podcast. One of your visions for this, and my vision for it as well, has been it's about civic life from diverse perspectives. So,
Right.
though, you're on this podcast, you and I share some identities and we don't share other identities. So we learn from each other. Why did you think it was so important to have a podcast that wasn't an echo chamber?
Well, first of all, we just got to break out of the soundbite. So again, this is a show for everybody, but it is a show being hosted and sponsored by Muslim American community members. And it's important for people who are not in the Muslim community to know a little bit more about us. There are people who want to cast us in a certain light that is untrue, unfair, and deceitful. And then there are people who are genuinely curious and just want to know more because of they're curious and want to know more about their neighbors. So this podcast becomes a really good idea. It goes to show that there is that the Muslim community does believe in voting, participation, running for office, showing up for jury duty, writing an op-ed, writing a letter to the editor, holding a community town hall forum, organizing, door knocking, being involved in your community life. And we're not only concerned about foreign policy issues, although we are concerned about foreign policy issues. We're concerned about zoning laws. We're concerned about water use. We're concerned about the environment. We're concerned about early childhood education. You yourself, Dilara, are an expert in education. That's your background and training. And so, people say, what is a Muslim issue? If it's an issue, it's a Muslim issue, right? We drink the water. We breathe the air, we go to the schools, we do everything everybody else does, and we do it together. So I think that it is very important for you to be communicating in this way. People need, if you believe something fervently, put up a flag and see who salutes it, right? Give people a chance, to agree with you or not.
Right.
That's fine. That's part of being in civic life. Is it not everybody agrees with everything all the time?
And in these 20 years, I've been proud of you, angry with you, agreed with you, and disagreed with you on many topics. And we'll talk about some of those topics today. But I will tell you, I always felt, Keith, that you said what you believed. So as an elected official, that is not common. In fact, it's quite rare to have an elected official say what they believe. So Tell us a little bit before we get into the issues. Tell us your story.
Sure.
Why was justice and truth at the heart of who you are? What made you this way?
Yeah, well, let me just say that what you just said was important. You've pointed out that you and I have been dear friends for 20 years. I've been in your home, you've helped me stay in office, and yet there have been times when we didn't see the issue the same way. And here's the lesson for your listeners: our friendship and connection didn't hang on us agreeing with each other on everything. So, some people, if you're only friends with somebody because they do what you say, then that's not really a friendship. The friendship's got to be big enough for you to say, I'm just not seeing it that way, bro. You know, and you know what? That's all right. And I've got to have enough respect for you that God put you on this earth to see the world through your own eyes, not mine, right? But this is an important thing. That's part of what you call civil discourse, civic discourse. The idea that our affinity, our bond of connection is not based on obedience, and it never can be. That's not relationship. Well, it's not good relationship. So I just wanted to point that out and say thank you for being my friend, whether you think I'm right or wrong, and not afraid to tell me when you think I'm wrong. And I do appreciate that because I learn things. So let me just answer your question. So I was born in the city of Detroit. My parents are both people of Southern roots. My mom's from Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana. My dad was born up north, but his family moved up north shortly before his birth, and they're from Georgia. So in many ways, I'm a Midwestern Southern guy. Um, my family really is a product of that northern migration,
Hmm.
which African American people from the Deep South facing segregation and seeking out better opportunity left the Deep South and moved to places like Chicago, your town. And when I think of Chicago, you can't not think of Mississippi in my mind. They're united. And Detroit is connected to Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina. And so I'm part of that great migration. Isabel Wilkerson wrote a great book about it called The Warmth of Other Suns. So those of you who want to learn about African American history, which is getting banned nowadays under this Department of Education, might want to do your own reading on Isabel Wilkerson is a good place to start. Anyway, so I majored. I went to Wayne State. I majored in economics. When I got to be a grad student, I started wondering, well, what am I going to do with an economics degree? I didn't know any economists, and I certainly didn't want to be a college professor. No shade on college professors, very important thing to be, but it wasn't me, right? I'm a little bit more of a hands-on operator kind of person. So I went to law school, went to University of Minnesota Law School, left my home in Detroit. I was ready to get out of Detroit, and I love Detroit, but sometimes it's good to leave your home, right? And so then I went to law school, meant to go back to Detroit, and I got better offers in Minnesota. By that time, I was married. I had one child and another one on the way, and I had to think about, you know, feeding them. And so started my legal career in Minnesota. Quickly found out I'm not a big firm guy. I'm not a corporate big firm lawyer. And again, the law firm I worked at was full of wonderful people who supported me. We did death penalty cases in Louisiana. I did plenty of pro bono, but that's what I wanted to do. And what they wanted to do is bill. And I was like, I don't want to just bill clients to,
Mm.
I mean, my idea of success is not a three-car garage house, although there's nothing wrong with those, and I'd love to have one myself. But at the end of the day, it didn't blow my hair back, if you know what I mean. It just amassing wealth was not exciting to me. So I went in to be the director of the Legal Rights Center. I was the youngest person on staff, and I was the executive director. So that's where I learned management. I learned how to manage people because these people didn't even think I was supposed to be there, let alone be their boss. And I was very proud of things we did there. Then left there and went into private practice. I did a radio show on public radio for about 10 years solid. And then one day I went to the state legislature and I saw some members saying some silly things. And I came home and I complained to my wife. I said, "These people don't know what they're talking about. They're wrong about this, that." And my wife says, "Well, if you think you know more than them, you should run yourself." I'm like, "Okay, I think I'll do it." So I spent 4 years in the legislature, and then I accidentally ran for Congress too, because before I ran for Congress, there had never been anyone who was black. There had never been anybody who was Muslim in the country. And I didn't even think I was going to win, Dilara. I thought that somebody else was going to win, but I'm not going to let them win without taking a firm position on Iraq. So I ran and I said, "Out now." It's all premised on a lie. And those other guys, they were trying to figure out troop movements and logistics. I'm like, "Look, I'm not, that's for the that's for somebody else to figure out. As Congress, you're not running for valedictorian, nor are you running for chief policy aide.
Mm.
You're running to express the values and the aspirations of the people, and I'll let some other smart person figure out how we're going to get out, but we need to get out."
Mm.
And so with that message, I won, you
Yeah.
know, and I was there for 12 years, and you helped me get there, and you kept me in there, and thank you and your husband. And then at some point, I felt I needed to, when Trump became president, I felt like I was ready to go to the front line and actually help enforce good laws. So I left and went to run for AG, ran statewide, and won that race, and then
Here we
ran
are.
again. Yeah. And as AG, I can tell you that I've never looked back. I've never woken up in the morning and thought, "Oh man, wouldn't it be awesome if I was still in Congress?" I never had that feeling. Now, I'm not trying to suggest people shouldn't run for Congress. If you're listening to this show, thinking about running for Congress, please do it. I had 12 great years, but I got to the point where I needed to hold some people accountable for wrongdoings, and it's starting with Donald Trump. And funny, I'm back doing it all over again. I never thought I thought he was gone, but here he is. So here we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. It just, God puts us in places at the right time, at the right moment. You are exactly where you are meant to be. I want to go back to 2007. That was
Sure,
when you became the first U.S. congressman who is also Muslim.
sure,
And you took your oath on Thomas Jefferson's Quran.
yeah,
And I have to tell you, as an eighth grade U.S. history and government teacher, I could never have been more proud, because I knew our founding fathers were well read,
right,
that they knew about Islam, that they had read the Quran, that George Washington had spoken about Mohammedans, etc. But it was as if, like, all of America learned suddenly that Islam had been here for hundreds of years, right? And was not new, and
hmm
was not. And so
nope,
I was so proud, and that was a natural step, because Africans who had been enslaved and brought into this nation, there were about 20% of all. So that's
right,
millions of people were some of the first Muslims in America. So thank you so much for that moment where you were able to open up for the rest of our nation what it meant to be Muslim, to be Black, to be a congressman, right?
yeah,
MashaAllah, how amazing.
yeah. Well, Alhamdulillah, and I just want to tell you, thank you for your support during those moments. I
Yeah.
mean, the reality is, when people started trying to attack me because of my faith, I think I even had to dig into the Constitution. And what I found is, in the Constitution, it says there is no religious test for holding office.
Mm.
And so when people like Dennis Prager, and yes, I'm going to name some names, and Chief Justice Roy Moore, and Alan Dershowitz, and others were trying to tear me apart because of my religion, um, the bottom line is the Constitution is what protected me, and gave in like there's a phrase that says where law when law ends, tyranny begins. You know, and but the law said there's no religious test. And our country really has done much better on the area of religious freedom than it does on other freedoms. Remember, women couldn't vote until the 1920s, and black men couldn't vote until the 15th, until the arguably the 13th Amendment, but then the 15th Amendment, but then that right went away until the 1960s. And so our country hasn't always had a straight line to justice and inclusion, but we've done pretty well on religious inclusion. I went to Newport, Rhode Island, to a synagogue called the Torno Synagogue, where George Washington wrote this Jewish congregation a letter saying you can practice Judaism freely and as you wish. As the President of the United States, I'm here to assure you nobody's going to interfere with your practice of your faith.
Yeah.
And even I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said he gave a donation to a church that was being built, and he said, you know what? I don't care even if a Mohammedan wants to be here. If they want to come here and talk, they can come here and talk. And so, bottom line is our country saw all the religious division of Europe, understood that it was divisive and destructive, and decided that now we're going to allow people to worship freely as they choose.
Yeah.
And it hasn't always been an easy ride. I mean, even today you have people who say that America is a Christian country. It is not a Christian country. Nowhere in the Constitution of the United States does it say it's a Christian country, and it only speaks in terms of religion in terms of it being the individual right of the individual citizen. First Amendment, Congress shall make no law establishing a religion, nor abridge the free exercise thereof. And that is what we have as a nation. So thanks for bringing up that moment in time. I'll never forget it. It was a remarkable moment in our nation's history
Yeah.
and in my personal life.
Well, you've had a few of those, my friend. And so the one that I most recently remember is 2018. You ran for Minnesota Attorney General. And then in 2020, and I remember at the time thinking, why would you leave Congress? Keith, don't do that. We need you there. And again, like I said, there's a reason for everything, because in 2020, George Floyd was killed by a police officer who knelt on his neck while he begged for breath. And the phrase, I can't breathe, came to life for all of us in so many real ways. You were the lead prosecutor. This was happening in Minnesota. And it was one of the very few convictions of a police officer in the history of our nation. I was in tears, Keith, when you spoke in front of the courthouse after the conviction. You know how when one of those moments you hold up your phone to the TV just to capture.
Yeah, I do
TV.
know.
I had captured you on video on my phone on the TV, and then you wrote the book, "Break the Wheel."
Yeah,
about
I
it,
did.
ending the cycle of police violence. Why was that case so important for you? Why was it so important for our nation? Because it
Well,
really was a watershed moment.
well, let me tell you. I mean, it goes back to our Constitution in a way. People think, not all people, but some people think, well, police brutality is bad and it's not nice and it's very unfortunate thing. But it also violates our Constitution. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution says that the government cannot unreasonably search or seize people. What does that mean? That means that the government has to be rational. When the government engages its citizenry, it has to have reasons for what it does and cannot act arbitrarily, capriciously, and must act rationally and reasonably. And to seize somebody unreasonably is to violate their Fourth Amendment rights. So when Derek Chauvin was convicted, the jury was saying that you violated his Fourth Amendment rights. Not only did you commit murder, you did a whole bunch of other stuff. And so this problem of unaccountable government, of abusive government, irrational government, arbitrary government, using violence against people is something that has been tolerated, particularly in the maintenance of racial hierarchy, right? So understand that the police in our country have always had two jobs. One legitimate that we all should support, one completely illegitimate, which is based on unconstitutional subject matter. Now, what do I mean? The first one, yes, the police should protect, should serve, should investigate crime, should hold people accountable. No problem with that. I'm a strong supporter of law enforcement when they're doing that. But there has been a historic other function, and that is to maintain the vertical hierarchy. Some of the first police departments in our nation's history were in South Carolina, and they were slave patrols, right? Um, some of the first, and then in New York, when the police department, much of what they were doing was making sure that European immigrant workers who were striking were not allowed to do it, and violence was used against them. And so, to a certain extent, um, you know, we've had these unequal systems in our society. And when it just comes to the issue of race, look at it. We've used the real estate and place to hold people down. You can't live here. You can't live there. You have to live only in this little place. We've had redlining laws. We've had sundown town laws. And then we've also had unequal, but once you concentrate people in a certain place, then you can deny them educational opportunity. You can deny them healthcare. You can hold them as like a cheap labor source for whatever you want to do. And the other thing to maintain them is not just the real estate, not just the healthcare, not just education, but then you use the iron fist of the state to maintain power over them, and that's what we call police brutality. So in your town, Chicago, when you had Laquan
McDonald,
who the officer said, oh, he was coming at me with a knife, actually was going away from him. The video showed it. This guy was shot like 16 times?
Yeah.
Some ridiculous number, and he's on the ground, and the bullets are going into his body and are making his body like react, and he's unresponsive. That case was ultimately prosecuted, was like 4 years after it happened, even though the video was available the instant that it happened. And so this is a pattern, but it's all about saying that some people want a country where opportunity and is distributed to some people and denied to others. That is what the ugly side, the underside of policing. I caution people who want to make it all about how the police are bad or whatever. Police are not bad. Police are not good or bad. They're neutral.
I think that's really powerful for us to understand as neighbors. As neighbors, sometimes we are the only ones protecting each other, and we have to be protecting each other. And so that's so critical. And so that brings me to last year, and we had a very difficult year, a toxic year in our nation as we were going through this very toxic election. When we talk about power and who has it, who's maintaining it, how they're serving the people with it, and how they're not, right? It isn't only the police, it's public officials that are also being used against each other, depending on who has the power. And so last year was one of those moments where I know you and I disagreed. You supported Kamala Harris for office, and I could not understand supporting a party that did not understand who it was serving. And you and I had these conversations, right? Our country needed somewhere to put this anger about the costs of living, our tax money going to kill Palestinians, the lack of leadership on immigration, an imperialism where like we are, walking around the planet like we own it when we had so many of our own problems we had to solve internally, right? The country needed somewhere to put that anger. And as an organizer, as a community activist, like we saw it, we heard it. And we would tell the Democratic Party, we would tell the representatives to our community, we would tell the liaisons, nobody was listening, Keith.
Right.
And you've spoken out against white supremacy. You've spoken out against Israel on the issue of Palestinian freedoms. You ran and you lost for Democratic National Party chair. But
Sure
then
did.
you still supported a Democratic candidate in a party we felt wasn't supporting us
Yep,
as Americans anymore.
it's true.
So why and what do we need to do now?
Well, the reason why is because I was concerned that if we didn't support the Democratic Party, we'd be dealing with what exactly we are dealing with right at this very moment. That's why. But let me tell you,
Sometimes that lesser of two evils, like it was enough. Our party needed to do better. It wasn't about the other party anymore. It wasn't about like going towards something bad. We knew what Trump stood for, bad, in so many different ways. But we also knew we had a party in office at the highest level, not at Congress necessarily, not at local levels, but certainly at the presidential level, that it couldn't threaten us with the lesser of two evils anymore. It was enough.
yeah, I hear you, but at the same time, as a state attorney general, I have had to file lawsuits against the person who's in office that there's no way in the world I would have had to file these same lawsuits if Kamala
Mhm.
Harris was the president. I've had to sue him for birthright citizenship. I've had to sue him for impounding $3 trillion in congressionally appropriated money. We're suing him right now because he appointed, or he has Elon Musk, an unvetted, unconfirmed, anything private citizen oligarch rummaging through your Social Security and through the payment system of the Treasury, and now it's taking aim at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the National Labor Relations Board, the FAA. He cleaned out the FAA. We didn't have any air fatalities during Biden, but we've had in the 70s, 80s in the first 3 weeks. So this, and I also knew this, as a person who has been to Gaza, 4 times since 2009, I knew that it could in fact get worse. Now Trump has appointed Huckabee, who says there's no such thing as a Palestinian, to be the Israeli ambassador. He has said he wanted to clear Palestinians away. Palestinians have sacrificed their lives to stay in their home. And now what is Trump saying? Ethnically cleanse them from their home. By the way, the ceasefire didn't happen under Trump, it happened under Biden. And so I knew that I believed, and I think history has borne me right, that we were in the frying pan. No question about it, we were. But we were about to jump into the fire, and I didn't want us to do that. So that's why I campaigned for Harris. I thought that I would have first of all, I knew she wouldn't do many of these horrible things that Trump is doing. And I also suspected that we could pressure her into a new policy. She's from a different era than Biden. She's from a different place. She's from a different location. And I think that at least we had a chance to change her trajectory vis-a-vis the Middle East. I knew she wouldn't say Gazans need to be kicked out of Gaza. I knew she wouldn't. I knew she would. I mean, let me tell you, Netanyahu didn't want somebody sweating him about human rights for Palestinians. And now he doesn't have anybody doing that at all. He's got somebody cheering him on and he said, what did Trump say? If you don't let those hostages go, there's going to be hell to pay. I mean, he's for people who've already lost 46,000 people, he's threatening them with even more death and destruction. So, look, I
Yeah.
know that this is complicated. You're spot on when you said it was. I know that that what the real difference between your position and mine wasn't that one of us cares about Palestinian and one of us doesn't. We both do.
Yeah, to be sure. I mean, 2024 were two choices Americans should not have had to make.
Yeah.
I see this as a failure of both of our parties. I see
Yeah.
this as a failure of our system where
Yep.
we had two choices
No disagreement there.
that were terrible choices, or were choices that simply did not understand or learn about our communities.
Yeah.
And so
No, you're right.
we are where we are now.
Well,
And
I
so
do hope,
uh
I was going to say, I do hope that the Democratic Party learns a lesson.
yeah,
And I'm a little worried that we're not going to learn the lesson.
yeah,
I mean, look, let me just say that I don't know any Muslims. I personally don't know them who spout hatred against the Jewish community.
yeah,
There might be some. I don't really know them, right? And if they do it, I condemn that. I absolutely condemn it. But I know a lot of Muslims who criticize Israeli policy.
yeah,
That doesn't make them anti-Jewish. That's not true. It means that a country with a flag, with membership of the United Nations, has responsibility to obey the law of war and to observe humanitarian protocols, norms, and regulations that are set down by Geneva Convention, by all kinds of other international laws. And you don't get to say, anybody who says we have to obey humanitarian laws just doesn't like us because of our religion. That's a lie. That's a manipulation. It's
yeah.
not true. It's not fair. And we should not let ourselves be bullied into approving the murder of more than 46,000 people, innocent civilians, because you're scared of somebody calling you names. I am not afraid of them calling me false names because I know that I will go to the last to protect Jewish life, Muslim life, Hindu life, any life. I will absolutely protect people's rights.
Yeah.
I am a staunch opponent of anti-Semitism, but I do believe that every country in this world, including Israel and the United States and Russia and China and Burma, must obey international human rights. And Netanyahu did not do that. And neither did Hamas. Nobody's defending Hamas, but we also are saying, so I guess that's what I'm saying, right? And I will say this, if you may allow me to say a few things. There are some things that I believe our community should have really been all over, and we really weren't that all over. One is that Chris Van Hollen and Bernie Sanders and about 19 senators
signed
a thing to oppose military aid to Israel unless it squared up right with humanitarian. And I didn't see us rallying in huge numbers to support it. I didn't see it. Maybe some of us did. Credit if you did. But a lot of people, it wasn't nothing close to the absolute vehement opposition to Kamala Harris.
And actually, I do want to say, those of us that did, we were in this with our Jewish brothers and sisters and
Right.
too. We
Right.
were thanking Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Van Hollen, and the others.
No, you guys did the right thing.
And
guys,
we did
but
it
I think
together. And when we protest Israel, it is
Right.
Christians, Jews, Muslims,
Together.
straights, gays, all of us together. I think it was very, very important to say that when we're fighting for justice,
Right.
there are all of us fighting it together. There isn't one group fighting it alone. And when we are working against injustice, it only works when we are all fighting it together as well.
And all I'm saying is, can we be a little bit more consistent?
Yeah.
Not the Muslim Civic Coalition. I'm talking about people showing up,
Yeah.
Various places, passionately and correctly standing up for Palestinian life, but then somehow kind of not Muslim Civic Coalition, but some folks were really were missing in action.
Yeah.
And I would tell folks, look, I cannot legislate foreign policy as a member of the Minnesota State Board of Investment. I cannot. It is illegal. You're asking me to do something that is illegal that I cannot do. And yet Congress is in fact the place to say that Israel can't have weapons if they're violating Palestinian human rights. 19 senators said so. Get on board. Rallies. This is you're winning. You're winning here. You're getting what you want. And for some folks I talked to, man, I just didn't see them on the forefront of that fight. And but we're quick to want to put people, we're quick. I don't know. There's some things that we do I wish that we wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And some things we don't do I wish we would do.
And I hear you, and I hear the angst in your voice and wanting more from our communities, and I think about that a lot. I think about what's happening now with Netanyahu relishing that Gaza would just be taken over
Right.
by the U.S.
Right. How about
I
that?
have Jewish friends and family members and community members that are saying this is unacceptable. And I
Right.
hope others now see the light of this is where he was headed. And if you supported him before, this is certainly not where we want to go in the world right now in justice. I have Catholic friends and family
Right.
members who the Pope was one of the first to ask for a ceasefire.
Sure
And
was.
yet we had Catholics in so many places around the world that were not supporting the Pope. In Islam, we had our faith guides us to be good to all people. And
Right.
yet we had Muslims who were, were saying things that could have been construed as anti-Jewish, supporting our brothers and sisters
We
that
can
were
never
upholding
allow that to go unaddressed.
any faith. We cannot have our
Right.
faiths hijacked by minority extremists
Right. Very
that are
true.
fascists. We
I
cannot
agree.
have our faith and our communities hijacked. And it doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter what your faith is. It is wrong to talk about supremacy of any kind because we're all in this together. I don't know what the future brings for you, Attorney General Keith Ellison,
Only God knows.
potentially Governor Keith Ellison, potentially Senator Keith Ellison, potentially President Keith Ellison, but always our brother Keith Ellison.
Always. Well, let me just say this before
yeah.
we wrap. Neither do I know. I'm going to go where my heart leads me, which is what I think where God speaks to me. I will say this. Here's a question. Am I more effective and helpful as Minnesota Attorney General, or am I more effective in the United States Senate? Because as everybody who watches politics knows, Senator Tina Smith has said she's not going to seek another term. So people are calling me, and what are you going to do, Keith? And my answer is, how many senators have blocked Trump's executive orders? How many Democratic attorney generals have blocked Trump's executive orders? Well, we've blocked 5 at the AG side. I love our senators. I'm pulling for our Democratic senators, but I just think that I want to be in the place where I can be most effective for my community, most effective to protect people's rights, respect, people's dignity, people's pocketbooks. And that's the question I'm asking myself. I'm looking for advice. What do people think? But I just want to say thank you, Doc.
I want to thank you very much, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. You have so much to do. You have a future in courageous leadership in the way that you've shared it in the past. And I'm looking forward to next steps.
We'll do it
because I
together.
know we got to do it together. Yep.
You know it. All right.
Thank you very much.
Bless you and all your works.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. What an incredible podcast. And thank you for this conversation.